On January 3, 2026, the world awoke to a nightmare unfolding over Caracas. Explosions lighting up the night sky, an unmistakable sign that war had arrived at Venezuela's doorstep. The city, once bustling with life, was now shrouded in fear and uncertainty as the first bombs fell. Before dawn, U.S. airstrikes targeted key Venezuelan military sites, including the massive Fuerte Tiuna complex, now ablaze and sending plumes of smoke into the early morning sky. The precision and scale of the attack left no doubt. This was a coordinated military operation, not a warning shot. This was no random violence. It was the start of a full-scale U.S. invasion, with troops and armored vehicles pouring into Venezuelan territory. The world watched in disbelief as the United States launched its most significant military campaign in Latin America in decades. Years of rising tension between Washington and Caracas had finally erupted into open warfare. Diplomatic efforts, sanctions, and threats had failed, and now, the fragile peace was shattered. The attack sent shockwaves across Latin America, destabilizing an already fragile region. Governments scrambled to respond, while citizens everywhere braced for the unknown. Oil supplies, millions of lives, and the principle of national sovereignty were suddenly at risk. The world's energy markets trembled, and ordinary Venezuelans faced a future filled with fear and hardship. The invasion threatened to redraw the political map of the Americas with consequences that would echo for decades. Alliances were tested, and the balance of power in the region was thrown into chaos. As the smoke cleared, the scale of the operation became clear. This was a meticulously planned assault, not a spontaneous act. Every target had been chosen for maximum impact, signaling a long and difficult conflict ahead. The world was left with urgent questions. Why now? What had pushed the U.S. to finally act, and what would the global response be? What was the U.S. endgame? Was this about regime change, resources, or something deeper? The answers remained elusive as officials scrambled to justify the sudden escalation. And what would become of Venezuela, now plunged into chaos? For millions, the future was uncertain, their lives upended overnight by forces far beyond their control. The Cold War between the U.S. and Venezuela had just turned hot, and the future was terrifyingly uncertain, not just for Venezuela, but for the entire hemisphere. The U.S.-Venezuela conflict is rooted in a century of oil, ideology, and power struggles. For decades, American companies dominated Venezuela's oil industry, fueling resentment and dependency. The rise of Hugo Chavez in 1999 marked a turning point. His socialist revolution directly challenged U.S. influence. Nationalizing industries and supporting leftist allies, Chavez set Venezuela on a collision course with Washington. The failed 2002 coup, which Chavez blamed on the U.S., cemented mutual distrust and the belief that confrontation was inevitable. Venezuela's response, a doctrine of asymmetric warfare, arming militias, and preparing for resistance. As the economy collapsed, U.S. sanctions intensified, and the Trump administration labeled Maduro's regime a narco-terrorist threat. Decades of distrust and escalating pressure made diplomacy impossible, paving the way for war. The invasion of Venezuela is the latest chapter in a long history shaped by the Monroe Doctrine. Originally a warning to Europe in 1823, the doctrine evolved into a justification for U.S. intervention across Latin America, from Roosevelt's Big Stick policy to Cold War coups and the war on drugs. The U.S. repeatedly asserted dominance in the region. These interventions rarely produced stable democracies, often leaving deep scars and resentment. The Trump administration's actions fit this pattern, labeling Maduro a threat and invoking old justifications for new interventions. The underlying principle remains. The U.S. reserves the right to act in its hemisphere. The invasion is not an isolated event, but a modern expression of a two-century-old policy. The invasion was the violent climax of months of escalating U.S. pressure. In late 2025, the Caribbean became a stage for American military power, with dozens killed in strikes targeting alleged traffickers. In December, President Trump announced a total blockade, cutting off Venezuela's last economic lifeline. Oil tankers were seized, and the economy was strangled. Covert CIA operations blurred the line between intelligence and undeclared war. with a $50 million bounty placed on Maduro. The U.S. framed the conflict as a law enforcement action against a criminal regime, justifying extreme measures. Each move pushed Venezuela closer to collapse, making war seem inevitable. The events of late 2025 were not just a prelude. They were the opening acts of war. In the early hours of January 3rd, Operation Freedom Sentinel was launched with precision and overwhelming force. Before the sun rose, a relentless wave of U.S. bombers streaked across the skies above Caracas, unleashing a barrage of airstrikes that lit up the city. The world watched in shock as the first images of the assault began to circulate, signaling the start of a new and uncertain chapter for Venezuela. Fuerte Tiuna, the nerve center of Venezuela's military power, was struck with devastating accuracy. Flames and thick smoke engulfed the compound, and the destruction was broadcast live on international news. The attack sent a clear message: no stronghold was safe, and the U.S. was prepared to dismantle Venezuela's defenses piece by piece. Across the country, other military bases and strategic installations were also targeted. The coordinated strikes crippled Venezuela's ability to mount a defense, leaving its armed forces disoriented and scrambling to regroup. Satellite images revealed the extent of the devastation, with entire facilities reduced to rubble. In the aftermath, President Maduro's government declared a state of emergency. But as chaos erupted in the streets, communications networks failed, plunging Caracas into confusion. Emergency vehicles raced through the city, while citizens struggled to understand the scale of the attack and what would come next. Within hours, Washington claimed a swift and decisive victory. U.S. officials announced that Maduro and his wife had been captured and were being flown out of the country under heavy guard. The world's media scrambled to verify the reports, as speculation ran wild. The operation, described as a decapitation strike, was designed to eliminate Venezuela's leadership in one bold move. U.S. Special Forces had executed their plan with speed and precision, hoping to break the will of any remaining resistance and bring the conflict to a rapid end. Yet, confusion and disbelief persisted on the ground. Venezuelan officials publicly denied the capture of Maduro, fueling rumors and deepening the sense of uncertainty. With government buildings abandoned and protesters flooding the streets, a dangerous power vacuum began to emerge. The U.S. had demonstrated overwhelming military might, but the political future of Venezuela was anything but certain. In Washington, debates raged over the next steps, while American convoys rolled through the streets of Caracas, asserting control but unable to restore order. As street battles erupted and journalists reported live from the chaos, it became clear that the battle for Venezuela and for the truth was only just beginning. The world braced for what would come next in this rapidly unfolding crisis. The invasion sent shockwaves through Venezuela's neighbors, especially Guyana. Guyana, sharing a disputed border and vital offshore oil fields, went on high alert. President Irfan Ali coordinated with ExxonMobil to protect oil platforms, fearing Venezuelan retaliation. The U.S., Guyana's key ally, pledged military support and deployed advanced defenses in the Caribbean. Experts saw this as a powerful deterrent, effectively placing Guyana under a U.S. shield. Meanwhile, the crisis triggered urgent diplomacy. CARICOM nations scrambled to respond, but divisions ran deep. Some leaders favored engagement with Maduro, others backed the U.S. The invasion forced the region to confront the crisis head-on, testing the unity of Caribbean organizations. The fate of Guyana's oil and regional stability now hung in the balance. The invasion triggered a global economic shock, shaking oil markets to their core. Overnight, prices soared and uncertainty gripped investors and governments alike as the world scrambled to adapt to a new reality. In Venezuela, the crisis deepened an already dire collapse. The country's vast oil reserves, once a symbol of hope and prosperity, now became a source of volatility and risk, fueling both internal chaos and international concern. As war disrupted production and exports, vital infrastructure was damaged or left idle. Oil prices spiked to levels not seen in years, sending shockwaves through economies dependent on energy imports. The humanitarian crisis worsened dramatically. Millions faced growing shortages of food, medicine, and basic necessities. Hospitals struggled to operate, and families waited desperately for aid that often never arrived. Neighboring Guyana, in the midst of an oil boom, now faced existential threats to its newfound prosperity. The sudden instability threatened to derail years of progress. U.S. military protection aimed to secure ExxonMobil's operations, but the proximity to war created deep uncertainty, scaring off future investment and raising fears of escalation. Globally, companies with Venezuelan assets faced the prospect of total loss, and regional trade was thrown into chaos, with supply chains severed and contracts abandoned. The long-term impact depends on the war's duration. A quick end might stabilize markets and offer hope for recovery, but a drawn-out conflict could trigger a massive refugee crisis, overwhelming neighboring countries and fueling sustained instability across the region. For Venezuela, the path to recovery seemed impossible as bombs fell, infrastructure was destroyed, and the economy crumbled under the weight of war and sanctions. The U.S. invasion drew sharp criticism from experts, who saw echoes of past failed interventions. Historian Edward Murphy warned that such actions often empower illiberal forces and rarely build stable democracies. Military analysts cautioned that Venezuela's years of preparation for asymmetric warfare could turn occupation into a bloody quagmire. Civilian militias and anti-American sentiment threatened to make the country ungovernable for any occupying force. The conflict risked massive refugee flows and regional destabilization, straining Colombia, Brazil, and the Caribbean. U.S. unilateralism undermined regional organizations, eroding trust and cooperation. The biggest risk: no clear exit strategy. Capturing Maduro was only the beginning. Without a plan for reconstruction, the U.S. risked creating a failed state on its doorstep. As the dust settled, Venezuela and the world faced a perilous crossroads. The fate of Maduro remained unclear, fueling instability and resistance. Venezuelans were trapped between foreign troops and a shattered state, facing urban warfare and humanitarian disaster. The promise of liberation rang hollow amid violence and division. Military force could topple a regime, but not heal a broken nation or build democracy. The true test would be rebuilding Venezuela, an outcome history suggests is rare after foreign intervention. The risk of a failed state or endless insurgency loomed large. The world watched, uncertain if Venezuela would rise from the rubble or descend further into chaos.